Welcome back to another Roblox Studio tutorial. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to set up a tool swap system so that the player can only have one tool at a time. And let me go and show you how this is going to look. So I'm going to start by picking up the sword. And then if I go and find another tool to equip, like maybe this handgun right here, when I walk over it, it's going to give me the handgun and drop the sword. Alright, so let's go ahead and dive in and see how we can do this in Roblox Studio. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. The scripting for this is going to be in a couple different places. And the first thing we're going to work on is just setting up a variable so that we can keep track of which tool the player currently has. And we're going to be doing that in the server script service. So what we need to do over in the Explorer menu is locate the server script service, which is right here. We're going to click on the plus sign and then add a script. And what we're going to be doing here is keeping track of which tool the player currently has so that we can check later on to see if this value changes. We know the player tried to pick up a new tool and we can swap them out. And the way we're going to do that is whenever the player joins the game, we're going to give them this value and then we'll update it as soon as they get a tool. So this needs to happen whenever a player joins the game. So we're going to start by saying local function. And then for the function name, we can say onPlayerJoin. Inside the parentheses, we're going to pass the parameter player. And this parameter is going to come from the player added event, which we'll do later on. Inside the function, we're going to be creating a value and then assigning it to the player. So we'll say local. And let's call our value current tool. And this is going to be equal to instance.new. And we're going to be creating a string value since we want to store the name of the tool. After that, we're going to say current tool dot name, and we're just going to set this to current tool. After that, we're going to say current tool dot parent, and this is how we're going to assign it to the player by saying equal to and player. Finally, down at the bottom here, we're going to connect this with the player added event by saying game dot players dot player added colon connect, and then we want to connect this with our function, which is onPlayerJoin. Okay, so let's go ahead and stop here and test it out, and we just want to check to make sure this value gets created and it gets stored with the player. So we're going to go ahead and open up the players folder in the Explorer menu. I'll open up my player, and we can see right here it has a value called current tool. Right now the value for it is blank, but what we're going to do next is set it up so that whenever the player touches one of those tools, it's going to store the name of the tool. So to be able to update that value with the current tool's name, we're going to be writing a script for the tool itself. So I'm going to start with the sword one right here. So I'm going to click on the tool, click on the plus sign, and then add a script. The first thing we're going to do is create a variable for this tool by saying local tool, and this is going to be equal to script.parent. After that, we're going to create a function that's going to run whenever the tool gets touched. So we're going to say local function. The name of our function can be update tool. Inside the parentheses, we're going to pass the parameter other part. So this other part was going to be whatever other object touches the tool. Inside the function here, we're going to start by saying local player. This is going to be equal to game.players colon find first child. Inside the parentheses is going to be other part dot parent, and then from the parent we're going to get the name by saying dot name. So in this line right here, other part will be whatever object touches the tool. So likely if it's on the ground, it's going to be the player's foot. And then by saying dot parent, we're going to use that foot to find the player. And then once we have the player model, we need to get the name, and we do that by saying dot name. And we're taking that name and searching in game.players to see if the player exists. Okay, so once we have a player, we're going to say if player. Then what we're going to do is we're going to say player dot current tool, which is the value that we just created, and we're going to change its value by saying dot value. And we want to set this value equal to the tool's name, and we can do that by saying tool dot name. There we go. And the last thing we need to do is connect this function to the touch event. And down here at the bottom, we're going to say tool.handle. And the reason we have to say .handle is tools don't have touch events, but the part inside of the tool called handle does. And that's one more thing that you want to check with your tool, is with whatever tools you're going to work with, make sure that they have a part named handle. Okay, so from here, we're going to say tool.handle.touched. We're going to connect this, so we'll say :connect. And then we're going to connect this with a function called updateTool. Alright, and that should be good. So let's go ahead and test it out. And what we're going to be checking for is whenever the player touches the sword, we're going to make sure that the sword name goes under current tool. So let's go ahead and check it out. Okay, so like before, I'm going to go to the Explore menu and open up the player's folder. I'll open up my player, and then I'm going to take a look at current tool. And we want to check this area right here to make sure that when I touch the sword, it updates it right here. And there we go. So you can see down here for the value part, it updates it with the tool's name, which is Classic Sword. So now that that's working, let's go ahead and copy that script and paste it under the handgun. So I'm just going to take the script that I just wrote. And what I'm going to do first is just rename this so it's easier to locate later on. And for the script name, I'm just going to say update. So now I'm going to copy this by right-clicking and pressing copy. You can also press Ctrl-C. And then for the handgun, I'm going to right-click and press paste into. And now we have that script under both items. So let's go ahead and check it out to make sure it changes the name. Okay, so I'll open up players, my player, and the current tool. So we'll double check with the sword. That looks good. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the pistol. And I can see when I do that, it updates the value to handgun. So that part of it looks good. So the last thing we need to do is write a script that checks to see if this value changes, so that whenever it sees that the value changes, it can drop the original tool and pick up the new one. So for this last part, we're going to be writing a script in the server storage. And whenever a player joins the game, we're going to give this script to the player. And what the script is going to do is going to check to see whenever the current tool value changes. And when that happens, it's going to swap the tools. So let's go ahead and locate server storage, which is right over here. We're going to click on the plus sign and add a script to this. The first thing we're going to do is define a player variable. So we're going to say local player. This is going to be equal to game.players, find first child. Inside the parentheses here, it's going to be script.parent.name. So what we're going to end up doing with the script is giving it to the player model, which is in the workspace. And then we still need to locate that player in the player's folder. So since the script is going to be inside the player, script.parent is going to get the player's model. And then we're taking the name and locating the player in game.players. After that, we're going to create a variable for the current tool value. So we'll say local. And then we get to say something like current. This is going to be equal to player.currentTool. And we'll just make this a little bit better. So instead of saying .currentTool, let's say : and then wait for child. And then inside the parentheses, we'll say current tool. The reason you might want to use wait for child is because when a player joins the game, not everything loads at once. So you just want to give it a chance to actually load in the current tool value before we assign it to this new variable here. Okay, so after that, we're going to define a function. And I'm going to do the function a little bit differently here. So I'm going to be combining the event with the function. Before we separated them, but this time I'm just going to put it together. But you can choose whichever style you like best. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say current, which is our variable name that we defined right here. From there, we're going to say .changed. So this is the event. So whenever this value gets changed, this event is going to be triggered. And whenever that happens, we're going to connect this with a function. And this time, I'm just going to put the function inside the parentheses. The first thing I'm going to do inside this function is define a small wait time. For me, 0.01 worked okay, but you may need to adjust this just depending on how your game works. So what I'm going to do next is define a variable for what I'm going to call the old tool, which is the tool that the player had right before they touched a new one. And I'm going to do that by saying local other tool. And this is going to be equal to player dot backpack. And then inside the backpack, we're going to say colon, find first child. And then we're going to use which is A. Inside the parentheses, I'm going to put tool. So I had a question about this, so I'm just going to explain it really quickly. So there's a difference between this one, find first child, which is A, and the other version of it, which we used in this script right here, which is just find first child. So this one right here is looking for a type of object. So a type of object could be something like a tool, a part, or something like that. So it's just looking for a certain type. Whereas in the other case over here, find first child is looking for an actual object's name. So in this case, we're not looking for a type of something, we're looking for an actual name of something. So if I want to check the player's backpack for just any type of tool, then I would use this one right here. But if I want to check the backpack for a particular tool, then I would use the other one and search by the name. Okay, so now back to the script. We're going to say if other tool. So if it's able to locate that old tool, then what we're going to do is we're going to say other tool dot parent. We're going to set this equal to game.workspace. This is going to remove it from the backpack and just put it back into the game. Then we'll say other tool dot handle dot position. And this is going to be equal to the original position of it. So I'm just going to copy this part. And then we're going to add a vector to it so it goes away from the player a little bit. So it's going to be plus and then vector3 dot new. And then this part you may need to change just depending on how you have things set up. But what I'm going to do is just send it about 10 units away from the X position. I'm going to lower it a little bit toward the ground by saying -4. And then for the Z position, I'm not going to change it. So if you notice that when you pick up the other tool, and if it's too close to the player and it automatically picks it up again, then this is the part that you may want to update. So if you want to send it farther away from the player, then you can adjust this number right here. If you notice the tool is getting stuck in the ground, you may want to change this to something like 0, or maybe like 1 or 2. And then if you want to, you can play around with the Z part, but you probably won't have to. Okay, and that's it for this script. So the last thing we have to do is just give the script to the player whenever they join the game. Before we go back to that script, I'm just going to rename this one. And this part is important, so make sure you rename it. So I'm going to rename this to Tool Update. So now we're going to go back to the server script service. And inside this function, we're just going to drop down a few lines. And what I'm going to do is make a copy of that script that we wrote in the server storage. And then we're going to give it to the player. So to do that, I'm going to say local tool check. And this is going to be equal to game.server storage. Inside the server storage, I'm going to be copying the script called tool update. So I'm going to say dot and then tool update. That's why it's important to rename this, because it's going to be looking in server storage for a file with that name. Okay, once it finds that file, we're going to say colon and then clone. And then we're going to say tool check dot parent. And then we're going to set the parent equal to game dot workspace colon wait for child. And then what we're going to be waiting for is player dot name. Okay, and that's it for this script. So let's go ahead and test everything now to make sure it's working. So I'm going to go ahead and leave current tool up here on the side so that we can take a look while we're testing. Okay, so when I picked it up, it looks like it's working for the value part of it. And then when I go to grab the sword, it switches it out. And you can see when the player picks up the new tool, the other one kind of goes away from the player. And that's what that vector3 does. So that's what this part right here does. So it just pushes it a little bit away from the player so that it doesn't automatically pick it up again. Alright, so that's going to be the end of the video. If you're testing this out and you run into some issues, just go ahead and let me know. If I need to, I'll post an update on this video. But I know this one has been requested a lot, so I just want to get something out there that seems to me like it's going to work. If it doesn't though, or it's running into some issues, just let me know and we can fix them. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed, and stay tuned for the next one.